did you know that basically half of all people who are caught in possession of Class A drugs are basically just allowed to walk free? Basically decriminalising it, isn't it, if that's the case? And most police officers now regard the abuse of drugs to be a medical issue rather than a criminal matter. Let's speak to David Shipley, who is a former prisoner and a writer and researcher on prison and justice issues. David, thanks for coming back on the show. Only a third of Class A drug possession offences resulted in a charge. Now, do you think that actually this is a sensible way forward? Because actually drugs rehabilitation should potentially be at the heart of people who have got an addiction or a user problem. And a lot of people, if they're addicted to drugs, might have mental health issues. They wind up in prison and probably end up smoking more drugs.
I think those descriptions are true, but this is the worst possible way to approach it. So you're absolutely right. Lots of people have big mental health problems, serious mental health issues. Lots of people have addiction issues, and many of them end up going to prison, where they often get worse, and that's terrible. And we should try to treat those people, not jail them. But if we were trying to solve that seriously, we'd be creating proper treatment environments. We'd be diverting mentally ill people from prison to secure mental health environments. We're not doing any of that. There's not been a debate in Parliament or a policy. The police are just deciding to withdraw from policing crime. And in this case, it's the possession of Class A drugs. And all that will happen then is those people are going to carry on taking drugs, developing addiction issues if they're going to, developing mental health problems with no support or help. And it's just storing up more harm for them and for society in the future.
But also it's giving a free pass, isn't it, to international criminal cartels, to drugs overlords, to terrorist organisations, all those people who exploit the drugs trade to fill their coffers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the problem with decriminalisation. If you were an ardent libertarian, you said, right, we're going to legalise all drugs, they're going to be produced and sold by companies that pay taxes, then there's an argument for that. Decriminalising like this, where we just stop policing possession at a small scale, leaves all the production, all the money in the hands of organised crime. And they do a huge amount of harm. They pay to have people shipped into this country illegally. There's a radio series out this week on BBC Sounds talking about this called The Smuggler, about a Vietnamese cannabis growing network that was shipping loads of people across the channel in small boats. So it funds that illegal industry as well. And so this kind of decriminalisation, I think, is very dangerous because it just makes life a little bit easier for organised crime. So
what's your response, actually, to what Sadiq Khan has said in recent days, saying that he thinks cannabis should be decriminalised? We know that 3/4 or 72% of people caught in possession of cannabis are just let go without any criminal sanctions. Anyone walking down London, and frankly the streets of most towns and cities in the UK, are probably familiar with the miasmic waft of Sensi hanging over every single street corner. But Sadiq Khan's turned around and basically said that cannabis should be decriminalised because there's a disproportionate effect on the prosecution or the stopping and searching of young black men. To me, I read this as a particular minority breaks the law. Oh, well, we'll have to get rid of that law then.
I mean, there is a real issue in that black men do get stopped more on suspicion of having cannabis, but actually have cannabis at the same rate as everyone the police stop. So there's definitely some racial disparity going on there. But I think the actual bigger issue, and I wrote about this in The Spectator this week, is that cannabis consumption seems to particularly harm Afro-Caribbeans. So there's been a study done looking at the impact of this in London, and actually Afro-Caribbean men are substantially more likely to develop cannabis psychosis if they smoke a lot of strong weed. And actually making it easier for people to access really harmful substances isn't being kind. I think, to the extent that there might be racism in who's stopped, that can be solved without making it easier for the drugs trade and harming more people.
Is a lot of this stuff also a bit like the sort of broken windows argument, that if you let go what some might consider small-scale criminality, possession of an illegal drug, that actually it's sort of, it's a thin end of a wedge. It opens up further criminal activity down the line?
I think it is. And I think also a lot of this is not really happening because the British state has decided to shift policy on drugs. I think a lot of it is just it hasn't got the capacity or the will to do its job anymore. This is Robert Jenrick posted a great video about this yesterday, talking about all these many ways in which society is getting worse and less orderly and less law-abiding. And it's not because we've made a choice as a country. It's just because we've given up, it feels like. The police are just not bothering to police whole sets of crime now. And we're seeing, a horrible decline in our nation as a result.
And in terms of prison and the access to drugs in prison, because, one might argue that if you've got a particular drugs habit and you get on the wrong side of the law and you end up in prison, it could actually serve as a brilliant wake-up call, that it's an opportunity to reevaluate your life and see where you've gone wrong and think, blimey, it's got so bad that I'm now in clink. I really should make a change and have a clean start. And ideally, prison should be a place where you're forced to go cold turkey. But it's not really like that, is it?
It's not, and I think that's the really sad thing. Some people do get shaken up by prison and get away from their addictions, but actually what we do is we put a lot of people with drug addictions in prisons with a lot of people who deal drugs. And there is a continual supply of drugs into our prisons. Organised crime often corrupts staff or uses drones or other methods to get drugs inside prisons. There's a huge market in there. And actually, on average, people will go in and come out more addicted to more drugs. So really what we should do is we should have different prisons. For people who are addicted and have mental health issues, they need to be in a secure environment focused around treating them, like the old secure hospitals we used to have. And I think, someone who's dealing or violent, whatever, they could go to a normal prison, which should separate those two populations.
David Shipley, former prisoner himself, writer and research on prison and justice issues. Thank you ever so much. I think social media should be held more to account because a lot of illicit drugs are just openly peddled on platforms like Instagram and Snapchat.